Midnight in California. A huge, crooked house rises out of the fog. Stairs that go nowhere. Doors that open into walls. Windows facing other windows. A maze in wood and glass. This is the dark story of America's most cursed mansion, the Winchester House. From the outside, it looks almost beautiful. A fairy tale palace with towers and porches and bright stained glass. But inside, every hallway feels wrong. Every step feels watched. And every nail was hammered in by a woman who believed that if she ever stopped building, she would die. Sarah Winchester, widow of the man who made a fortune selling the rifle that won the West. Her money came from a gun that killed tens of thousands. Spiritualists told her the ghosts of the dead were hunting her, so she started building this house as a shield. 24 hours a day. For 38 years, with no master plan, only fear, rooms sealed up and never opened again. Secret passages the servants refused to enter alone, visitors who said they heard footsteps in empty hallways, and voices calling their names. Was Sarah Winchester a mad woman trapped in her own grief? Or did she know something dark about this mansion that we are still too afraid to believe? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Disappeared into Her Own House. The workers knew something was wrong. Morning after morning, they walked through the gates of the sprawling estate in San Jose, California. They picked up their tools, checked their instructions when there were any, and they built. Staircases, hallways, bedrooms, bathrooms, entire new wings rising in a matter of weeks. But they almost never saw the woman who paid them. Sarah Winchester stayed out of sight. She moved through the house like a shadow, leaving instructions on slips of paper, sending out cash payments through servants, sketching designs on scraps that made no architectural sense. A door 7 feet high, a staircase with steps only 2 inches tall, a window built into the floor. The men did not press her with questions. The work was steady. The pay arrived on time. And in the 1890s, during a period of economic panic and uncertainty, that was enough. But they talked among themselves. They whispered that she held séances at midnight in a room with 13 hooks on the wall. They said she rang a bell at midnight to summon the spirits, and again at 2 in the morning to send them away. They said she believed the ghosts of everyone killed by a Winchester rifle were hunting her, and that the only way to confuse them, to keep them wandering and lost, was to never stop building. Some decided she had lost her mind. Others were sure she was strangely clever. A few suspected she might be both at once. What is known as this: Sarah Winchester inherited a fortune worth roughly $500 million in today's money. She used it to create a house that defied logic. A house that grew and twisted and folded in on itself for nearly 4 decades. A house that, by the time she died, had become one of the strangest structures ever built in America. The work never stopped. Day crews hammered and sawed under the California sun. Night crews worked by lamplight, the sound of their tools echoing through the orchards. Neighbors said you could hear the hammering at all hours. Some said it sounded like a heartbeat. Sarah reportedly slept only a few hours a night. Servants said she wandered the halls in the dark, checking rooms, testing locks, listening. For what, they did not know. Maybe for footsteps that were not hers, maybe for voices, maybe for the kind of silence that feels like something held back. The house became a labyrinth. 160 rooms at its peak, 40 staircases, 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors. Some led to ordinary places. Others led nowhere. A closet 3 inches deep, a chimney that stopped short of the roof, a door on the second floor that opened directly onto a 15-foot drop into the garden below. Visitors who came to call, and there were fewer and fewer of them as the years went on, said the house felt wrong. Not haunted in the way ghost stories usually sound. Just wrong. Like walking through a fever dream. Hallways that doubled back on themselves. Rooms that seemed to shift when you were not looking. But Sarah kept building. She kept the workers employed. She kept the house growing. And she never explained why. To understand why, you have to go back. Back to New Haven, Connecticut. Back to a young woman who married into one of the wealthiest and most controversial families in America. Back to the rifle that made it all possible. Back to the beginning. Chapter 2. The rifle that built an empire. The Winchester rifle did not look like much at first. A simple lever-action design. Wood stock, metal barrel, a mechanism that let you reload faster than any gun before it. But that speed changed everything. Before Winchester, a soldier or settler had to stop, fumble with powder and ball, reload one shot at a time. The Winchester let you fire again and again without pause. 15 rounds in some models. You could clear a room, hold off a raid, or hunt game without ever lowering your weapon. The marketing was ruthless and brilliant. The gun that won the West. Posters showed cowboys and frontiersmen, rugged and free, Winchester in hand. It became a symbol of American expansion, of manifest destiny, of progress. It also became a symbol of death. Native American tribes facing Winchester repeaters in the hands of the United States cavalry. Bison herds, 60 million animals, reduced to near extinction, many shot with Winchesters by commercial hunters. The Civil War. Range wars. Outlaws and lawmen both carried them. The rifle was everywhere, and everywhere it went, people died. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company made a fortune. By the 1860s, Oliver Winchester Hinscott, the company's founder, was one of the richest men in America. His son, William Wirt Winchester, inherited the business, and William married Sarah Lockwood Pardee in 1862. Sarah was 23 years old, small, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair and serious eyes. She came from a well-respected Connecticut family. She was educated, fluent in multiple languages, and an accomplished pianist. Friends described her as thoughtful, shy, deeply religious. She married into wealth she could not have imagined. The Winchester mansion in New Haven was grand but tasteful. Dinner parties, charity events, the kind of life expected of a family with new money trying to prove they belonged among old money. Sarah played her role, the quiet, proper wife, the dignified daughter-in-law. But there was a weight to it. The rifle was never far from conversation. Every dress, every chandelier, every servant's wage, it all came from the same source, a weapon, a tool designed to kill as efficiently as possible. Sarah never spoke publicly about how she felt about that, but people close to her said she was uncomfortable with it, that she asked questions, that she struggled with the contradiction of living in comfort built on violence. Then, the funerals began. First, in 1866, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester. A healthy baby, bright-eyed and small like her mother. Sarah poured everything into her, all her love, all her hope for a future that might feel lighter than the past. Annie lived 6 weeks. She died of marasmus, a wasting disease, likely caused by malnutrition or an inability to digest milk. The doctors could do nothing. Sarah held her daughter as she faded. The grief was absolute. Sarah withdrew. She stopped attending social events, stopped playing piano. Friends said she barely spoke for months. William tried to comfort her, but the loss lived between them, like a shadow. They never had another child. 15 years later, in 1881, William contracted tuberculosis. he weakened slowly, coughing blood, losing weight, fading in the same grand house where they had once held dinner parties. Sarah nursed him, watched him die. She was 43 years old, a widow, childless, and the sole heir to a fortune built on 50,000 deaths. Chapter 3. The Medium and the Message. Sarah could not sleep. Night after night in the New Haven mansion, she lay awake in rooms that felt too large and too empty. The silence pressed down on her. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind against the windows felt like someone trying to get in. Her friends worried. Her family tried to help. But grief like that does not respond to polite concern or well-meaning advice. Sarah was drowning, and she was looking for anything at all, that might explain why God had taken everything from her. This is where spiritualism stepped into her life. In the 1880s, America was obsessed with the dead. Séances filled parlors across the country. Mediums claimed they could reach across the veil and bring back voices, messages, proof that death was not the end. It was part comfort, part spectacle, part desperate hope dressed up as ritual. For people like Sarah, educated, religious, but shattered by loss, spiritualism offered something the church could not: the possibility of contact, of answers, of hearing her daughter's voice one more time. The details vary depending on the source. Some say a friend brought Sarah to a medium in Boston. Others insist it happened in New Haven. A few accounts claim Sarah sought out the medium herself, traveling in secret, unwilling to let her family know how far her grief had taken her. What most stories agree on is this: the medium told Sarah she was cursed, not by God, not by fate, but by the spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles, thousands of them, tens of thousands, Native Americans, soldiers, settlers, hunters, all of them restless, all of them angry, and all of them drawn to the family that profited from their deaths. The medium reportedly told Sarah that the spirits had already taken her husband and child, and they would take her too, unless she did something to appease them. She had to move west. As far from New Haven as she could go, she had to buy a house, and she had to build constantly, without stopping, because as long as the house was unfinished, the spirits would be confused, forced to wander, distracted, unable to find her. The moment construction stopped, the medium said, Sarah would die. Most people would have dismissed this as nonsense, the ravings of a charlatan preying on a grieving widow. But Sarah did not dismiss it. She listened. And whether she believed every word or simply clung to a structure that gave her grief a purpose, the result was the same. She made a decision. In 1884, Sarah sold the New Haven mansion. She packed her belongings, said goodbye to the life she had known, and boarded a train heading west. She did not tell most of her family where she was going. She simply left. She traveled across the country, through farmland and prairie, over mountains and desert, until she reached California, the edge of the map, the place where America ran out of land and met the sea. In San Jose, surrounded by orchards and fog, she found an unfinished farmhouse, 8 rooms, 2 stories. Nothing special at first glance, just a wooden structure sitting on 40 acres of fruit trees. She bought it, and then she hired carpenters. The work began in 1886, and for the next 38 years, it never stopped. Chapter 4. The House That Never Sleeps. The hammering started at dawn. Carpenters arrived at the San Jose property and found plans waiting for them. Sometimes there were sketches on brown paper. Sometimes there were only verbal instructions delivered by the head foreman. Sometimes there was nothing at all, just orders to tear down what they had finished yesterday and start again from scratch. They worked until sunset. Then the night crew arrived. This was not how normal construction worked. Most building projects operated only during daylight hours. Materials were expensive. Labor was costly. Working at night by lamplight and candlelight was inefficient and dangerous. But Sarah did not care about efficiency. She cared about continuity. The house had to keep growing, day and night, every single day. Workers described a strange rhythm to the job. Some days they would frame out an entire bedroom, complete with windows and a door. The next morning, Sarah would decide the room needed to be somewhere else. They would dismantle it board by board and rebuild it 20 feet to the left. On other days, they would construct a staircase that rose 7 steps, turned at a landing, and dead-ended into a ceiling. They would ask the foreman if this was a mistake. He would shrug and say that those were the orders. Doors were installed that opened onto blank walls. Cabinets were built only 1 inch deep, decorative, useless, like props on a stage. A chimney rose 4 stories and stopped just short of the roof, venting into the attic instead of the open air. Windows were placed at floor level, staring into other rooms rather than outside. None of it made sense, but the paychecks always cleared. And in an era when work was uncertain and wages were often delayed or never fully paid, that mattered more than logic. Sarah paid in cash, weekly, on time. She also fed the workers, hot meals prepared by her kitchen staff, and carried out to the scaffolding and work tables. In the 1890s, during economic depressions that left families hungry and desperate, this job was not just employment, it was a lifeline. The men stayed, and they kept building. Sarah herself remained mostly hidden. She moved through the house at odd hours, inspecting work, leaving notes, changing plans. Servants said she rarely slept more than a few hours, that she spent much of the night walking the halls, alone, listening to the shifting bones of the house. One worker reportedly glimpsed her once through a window. A small figure dressed in black, standing in an unfinished room, staring at the walls as if reading something written there that no one else could see. The house grew. 8 rooms became 20. 20 became 40. Wings extended in multiple directions. Towers rose. A grand ballroom was added, then sealed off and never used. A conservatory appeared with stained glass windows imported from Europe. A kitchen was fitted with modern appliances that were cutting edge for the time, but the oddities multiplied faster than the normal rooms. A door on the 2nd floor opened directly onto empty air over the garden. No balcony, no staircase, just a 15-foot fall onto brick pavement. A tiny staircase, with steps only 2 inches high, rose slowly over 44 steps to climb a little more than 9 feet. Switchback hallways looped endlessly, designed, it seemed, to confuse anyone trying to walk from one end of the house to the other. Local newspapers started paying attention. The Winchester Mystery House, they called it. The mansion where the widow kept crews working day and night on a building project that made no sense to anyone outside the gates. Reporters tried to interview Sarah. She refused. Guards were hired to keep trespassers off the property. The gates stayed locked. The orchards formed a quiet, leafy wall between the road and the growing maze of turrets and gables. But the rumors slipped through anyway, and they were about to get much darker. Chapter 5. The Séance Room. Deep inside the maze, there was a room Sarah visited every night. The servants called it the Séance Room. A small, unremarkable space tucked away in the center of the house, where no outside walls touched it. No natural light reached it. You had to know the route. Through a specific hallway, past a door disguised as a cabinet, down a passage barely wide enough for one person. Once inside, the room felt wrong. 13 hooks lined one wall. No one knew what they were for. No coats ever hung there. No tools. Just 13 iron hooks evenly spaced, holding nothing at all. A single entrance, but 3 exits. One door led back the way you came. Another opened into a different hallway entirely. The third led to a drop, a false door that, if opened carelessly, would send you tumbling into a storage room 8 feet below. In the center of the room sat a cabinet. Inside, reportedly, Sarah kept robes and objects used in her rituals. What kind of objects, the servants would not say, or did not know. A bell system connected this room to Sarah's bedroom. 2 bells. One rang at 2 in the morning, the hour when Sarah believed the veil between worlds was thinnest. That bell summoned the spirits, or summoned Sarah to meet them. Accounts differ. The second bell rang at precisely 2 in the morning again in some versions of the story to send the spirits away. 13 chimes. One for each hook on the wall. Workers who stayed late claimed they heard the bells, heard footsteps in the hallways afterward, heard Sarah's voice, faint and muffled, as if she were speaking to someone in a language they could not quite make out. But no one ever saw what happened inside that room. Sarah never explained it, never confirmed or denied the séances. The only hints come from servants who worked in the house for years. And even they offered fragments, not facts. One housekeeper reportedly said Sarah spent hours alone in the séance room, sometimes sitting in complete darkness, sometimes lighting candles that burned strange colors. Another said Sarah received instructions during these sessions, architectural plans, directions for the next phase of construction, warnings about which rooms to avoid. Whether Sarah truly believed she was communicating with the dead, or whether the séance room was simply a place where she could retreat and grieve in private, we do not know. What we do know is this: the room was real. It still exists. Tourists can visit it today, though the hooks are gone and the bell system has long since been disconnected. And we know the house kept changing based on decisions Sarah made in the night. Rooms that were finished one week would be sealed off the next. Entire wings that took months to build were suddenly closed, doors nailed shut, furniture removed, as if something had happened there that Sarah wanted to forget or contain. The workers learned not to ask why. They learned to follow the new plans, even when those plans seemed to contradict everything they had been told the day before. Because the alternative was losing the job, and no one wanted to lose this job. The house was growing faster now. 40 rooms became 60, 60 became 80. The structure sprawled across the property like a living thing, swallowing the orchards, casting long shadows. And at the center of it all, every night at 2 in the morning, a bell rang in the darkness. Chapter 6. The Architecture of Confusion. If you had walked into the Winchester house in 1900, you would not have made it 10 feet before getting lost. The front door, when Sarah bothered to use a front door at all, opened into a hallway that immediately split in 3 directions. Each path looked identical. The same wallpaper, the same lighting, the same wooden floors that creaked under your weight. Pick the wrong direction, and you would find yourself walking in circles, literally. Some hallways looped back on themselves, laid out, so that anyone following them would end up exactly where they started, convinced they had traveled much farther. Other hallways dead-ended abruptly. You would turn a corner expecting another passage and instead face a blank wall. No door, no window, just wallpaper and silence. The staircases were worse. One rose 44 steps to climb only 9 feet. Each step just 2 inches tall, so shallow you barely lifted your foot. Sarah reportedly built it this way because of her arthritis. The gentle incline was easier on her joints than a normal staircase, but to visitors unfamiliar with the house, it felt surreal, like climbing forever without getting anywhere. Another staircase rose 7 steps, turned at a landing and slammed directly into the ceiling. No attic access, no hidden door, just wood and plaster. The workers had built it, then stopped, waiting for further instructions. The instructions never came. The staircase stayed. Doors were everywhere, 2,000 of them, according to later inventories. Some opened into ordinary rooms, others opened into walls. A few opened into other doors. You would turn the handle, push, and find yourself face to face with the back of another door just inches away, sealed shut. One door on the second floor opened onto nothing, a straight drop into the garden below, 15 feet down onto brick pavement. No railing, no warning, just a threshold and empty air. Why build a door like that? Some say it was a trap for the spirits. They would chase Sarah through the house, burst through the door, and fall. Others say it was simply a mistake, a doorway meant to lead to a balcony that was never built. But Sarah never had it removed. It stayed. Like everything else that made no sense. Windows faced windows. You could stand in one room, look out a window, and see directly into another room across a narrow courtyard. No privacy, no view of the outside world. Just glass staring at glass. Some windows were installed at floor level. You would walk into a room and nearly trip over a pane of glass, set flush with the floorboards, offering a view down into the basement or up into the rafters, depending on which floor you were on. The ballroom was perhaps the strangest space, grand and beautiful, with parquet floors and stained glass windows worth thousands of dollars. 2 pipe organs. Sarah loved music and reportedly played alone at night. Space for 100 guests. But Sarah never held a ball, never invited anyone. The room was built, furnished, and then abandoned. Servants said she walked through it sometimes, late at night, trailing her fingers along the walls. But she never played the organs when anyone else was in the house. The stained glass windows in the ballroom featured spider webs. Intricate, beautiful designs of webs glistening with morning dew. Spiders appeared throughout the house, actually, carved into woodwork, embedded in tile work, woven into iron grates. Sarah reportedly believed spiders were good luck, that they trapped evil spirits the way they trapped flies. So she filled her house with their images, creating a web made of wood and glass and stone. But the web was not just decorative. The house itself had become a web, hallways tangled, rooms layered on top of rooms, passages twisted back on themselves until even the people who built them could not always remember the route. By 1906, the Winchester house had grown to over 100 rooms, 7 stories at its tallest point. Towers rose above the orchards, visible from the road. It was the largest private residence in California. A mansion that rivaled the estates of railroad barons and silver kings. And then, on April 18th, at 5:12 in the morning, the earth moved. Chapter 7. The earthquake that changed everything. The shaking started without warning. San Francisco, about 60 miles to the north, took the worst of it. Buildings collapsed, fires erupted. More than 3,000 people died within minutes. The Great Earthquake of 1906, magnitude 7.9, became one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. But San Jose felt it too. At the Winchester house, the ground rolled like a wave. Chimneys cracked and toppled. Windows shattered. The 7-story tower, the tallest structure on the property, groaned and swayed, and then it fell. Tons of wood and brick crashed through the floors below, punching through room after room until the debris settled in a heap of splintered timber and broken glass. Dust filled the hallways. The house creaked and moaned, as if the entire structure might collapse. Sarah was inside. She had been sleeping in a bedroom on an upper floor. Accounts differ on exactly which room. because Sarah moved her sleeping quarters frequently, never staying in the same place for more than a few weeks. When the shaking started, she tried to reach the doorway. Standard advice during an earthquake: find a frame, brace yourself. But the door would not open. The house had shifted. The frame had warped. Sarah pushed, pulled, threw her weight against the wood. Nothing. She was trapped, alone in the dark with the building tearing itself apart around her. Servants heard her calling. They grabbed tools and crowbars, forced their way through debris-choked hallways, and found the jammed door. It took nearly an hour to pry it open. When they finally pulled Sarah out, she was shaken but unharmed, physically at least. Emotionally, something had cracked. Sarah walked through the damaged house in silence. She saw the collapsed tower, the shattered windows, the rooms buried under rubble, walls split open, exposing the skeleton of beams and studs underneath. The workers expected her to order repairs, to rebuild the tower, to restore what had been lost. Instead, she told them to seal it off. The entire front section of the house, 30 rooms, including the tower and the main entrance, was closed. Doors were nailed shut. Hallways were blocked with furniture and boards. Sarah never entered those rooms again. She did not explain why, but the servants thought they understood. The earthquake, Sarah believed, was a message, a warning from the spirits. She had displeased them somehow, built something wrong, invited the wrong kind of attention. The collapse of the tower was not random. It was punishment. So she sealed the damage like a wound, left it frozen in time, and moved the construction to other parts of the house, as if starting over, trying to appease forces that could shake the earth itself. The building continued. But it was different now. Before the earthquake, the house had a certain chaotic energy. Strange, yes, but also ambitious. Towers reaching skyward, grand rooms. A sense that Sarah was creating something immense, even if no one understood what it was. After the earthquake, the house turned inward. New rooms were smaller, hallways narrower. The construction focused on additions that sprawled horizontally rather than vertically. Wings that extended across the property instead of rising into the sky. As if Sarah no longer trusted height, as if she wanted to stay closer to the ground, she also became more reclusive. Before 1906, Sarah occasionally interacted with workers, left instructions in person, walked through finished rooms to inspect the work. After the earthquake, she retreated almost entirely. Days would pass without anyone seeing her. Instructions came through intermediaries. Cash appeared in envelopes. The foreman managed the crews. The housekeeper managed the staff. And Sarah moved like a ghost through her own house. Neighbors reported seeing lights in the windows at strange hours, a single candle flame moving from room to room, floor to floor, as if someone were searching for something they had lost. The séance room bell still rang at 2 a.m. Workers still heard footsteps, but now there was something heavier in the air. A sense that the house had been marked, that the collapse was not just structural damage. It was proof. Proof that Sarah Winchester was right to be afraid, and proof that no amount of building would ever be enough. Chapter 8. The workers who stayed. Most people would have quit. The earthquake had nearly killed their employer. The house was a maze that made less sense every day. The work was repetitive, bizarre, and seemingly endless. Build a wall, tear it down, build it again somewhere else. But the workers stayed, not because they believed in ghosts, not because they understood Sarah's vision. They stayed for something simpler, and in their world, far more real. Loyalty earned by steady pay and unusual kindness. Sarah Winchester paid better than almost anyone else in the valley. A skilled carpenter could make $2 a day working on farms or public buildings. Sarah paid $3, sometimes more for specialized work, and she paid every week in cash, without fail. No delays, no excuses. No quiet wage theft, a common practice in an era when employers often found reasons to dock pay or withhold it entirely. She also fed them. Every day at noon, the kitchen staff brought out hot meals. Not scraps or leftovers, but full plates, roasted meat, vegetables, fresh bread, coffee. In the winter, there was soup. In the summer, cold lemonade and fruit from the orchards. For men who often went home to sparse dinners, this was not a small detail. Some workers later said the midday meal at the Winchester house was the best food they ate all week. Beyond wages and food, there was something even rarer: security. The 1890s saw multiple economic depressions. Banks failed, businesses closed, construction jobs dried up for months at a time, leaving families desperate. But the Winchester house kept building, through panic, through recession, through hard winters when most projects shut down. Sarah's house never stopped. Men worked there for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Some brought their sons when the boys were old enough to swing a hammer. Fathers and sons, side by side on staircases to nowhere and doors that opened into walls. They did not understand the project, but they understood the paycheck. And in an era of brutal economic instability, that was enough. One worker, a carpenter named John Hanson, later told a reporter that the Winchester job saved his family. His wife had been sick. Medical bills piled up. Other employers would have let him go. A sick family meant missed days, distraction, unreliability. But Sarah did not fire him. Instead, she quietly increased his pay and told the foreman to excuse him when he needed to go home early. No long explanations required, just a simple acknowledgement that life was hard and people needed room to deal with it. Hanson worked on the house for 18 years. Stories like his were common. A laborer whose child needed surgery. Sarah paid for it. A plasterer who broke his arm and could not work for 2 months. Sarah kept him on salary anyway. An elderly maintenance man who could barely climb ladders anymore. Sarah gave him lighter duties instead of pushing him out. This was not charity staged for the public. Sarah never advertised her kindness, never called the newspapers. She simply took care of the people who took care of her house. The workers noticed, and they protected her in return. When reporters came sniffing around, asking questions, trying to peer through windows or climb fences for a glimpse of the mad widow, the workers turned them away. When neighbors gossiped about strange lights and midnight bells, the workers shrugged and kept their opinions to themselves. They built her maze. They followed her impossible instructions. And they kept her secrets. Some of them likely thought she was eccentric, maybe even unwell. But she was their eccentric, unwell employer, and she treated them better than anyone else ever had. So when Sarah asked them to build a staircase that went nowhere, they built it. When she asked them to install a door in the floor, they installed it. And when she asked them to seal off 30 rooms and never speak of what they had seen inside, they sealed the rooms and stayed silent. By 1910, the house had grown to over 160 rooms, the largest it would ever be. A sprawling, impossible structure that employed dozens of people and baffled everyone who saw it. But for the men who built it, the Winchester house was not a mystery. It was a job, a good one. And in a world that offered so few of those, that was enough. Chapter 9. The Widow the World Wanted to See. The newspapers could not resist her. By 1910, Sarah Winchester had become exactly the kind of story that sold papers. A reclusive widow, a vast fortune, a house that made no sense, and best of all, rumors of ghosts, curses, and midnight rituals. The San Francisco Call ran the first major story, Mystery House of Santa Clara Valley, the headline read. The article described a mansion built by a woman who fears the spirits of those killed by her family's rifles. It mentioned sealed rooms, endless construction, and workers who spoke in whispers about bells that rang at 2 in the morning. The story spread. Other papers picked it up, embellished it, added details that may or may not have been true. One claimed Sarah wore a veil at all times and never let servants see her face. Another said she ate dinner at a table set for 13, with 12 empty chairs for the ghosts she believed joined her. A third reported that she had spent over $5 million on the house, a staggering sum, roughly equivalent to $150 million today, and had no intention of ever finishing. Sarah never responded, never issued corrections, never gave interviews. Her silence made it worse, or better, depending on your perspective. The lack of denial let the stories grow wilder. Each retelling added new layers. The séance room became a chamber of horrors. The staircase to nowhere became proof of madness. The construction itself became evidence of a woman trapped in delusion, building frantically to outrun death. The public ate it up. This was the Gilded Age, sliding into the progressive era. America was obsessed with the very rich and the very strange, industrialists building mansions, eccentrics doing inexplicable things with their fortunes, and here was Sarah Winchester, a woman with more money than some small countries, spending it all on a house that seemed designed to confuse and disturb. She became a caricature. The Mad Widow, the Ghost Lady, the woman who talked to the dead. But the caricature was not accurate. Yes, Sarah was reclusive. Yes, she believed in spiritualism. But so did millions of Americans, including well-respected scientists, authors, and political leaders. Séances were common. Mediums were mainstream. The idea that the dead could communicate was not fringe. It was fashionable. And yes, the house was strange. But Sarah was not incoherent. She managed a large estate, supervised dozens of workers, handled complex financial matters, corresponded with family members, maintained orchards that produced fruit sold commercially. She was functional, organized, in control. The oddities in the house were not entirely random. Many had practical explanations. The shallow staircases accommodated her arthritis. The many bedrooms let her move frequently, a common practice for people with chronic pain trying to find comfortable sleeping positions. The small doors and low ceilings might have been designed for a woman who stood barely 5 feet tall. Standard-sized doors would have felt oversized and imposing. Even the doors to nowhere could be explained. Construction plans changed. Additions were made. Old doorways became obsolete, but were left in place rather than patched over. It was not necessarily madness. It was the messy reality of building continuously for decades without a single fixed master plan. But newspapers did not want practical explanations. They wanted mystery, fear. A story that confirmed what people already believed, that too much money, too much grief, and too much time alone would drive anyone insane. So that is the story they told. Sarah Winchester, the papers said, was a woman haunted. Not metaphorically, literally haunted by the ghosts of thousands, building a house to trap them, losing her mind one room at a time. The truth was quieter and sadder. Sarah was a widow who had lost her only child and her husband within 15 years. She had inherited a fortune tied to violence she had not personally committed, but benefited from every day. She had moved across the country to escape the weight of that inheritance and had found a project, strange, yes, but also purposeful, that gave structure to her grief. She kept people employed. She built something massive and strange and entirely her own. And she did it while the world watched from a distance, judged her motives, and turned her into a living ghost story. By 1915, Sarah was in her 70s. The construction had slowed, not stopped, never stopped, but slowed. The house had reached its peak size, 160 rooms, a sprawling monument to something the world would never fully understand. And Sarah, tired and aging, still walked the halls alone at night. Chapter 10. The Last Rooms. Sarah's hands shook now when she held a pen. Her arthritis had worsened. The same condition that had shaped the house, those shallow stairs, those small rooms, now made it difficult for her to write instructions, sketch plans, or do the work that had defined nearly 4 decades of her life. She moved more slowly through the hallways. Servants heard her cane tapping on the wooden floors at night, a faint rhythm that echoed through the empty corridors. Tap, 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 pause. Then movement again, as she made her way from one room to another, checking locks, testing doors. She still changed bedrooms frequently, but now it was no longer restlessness, it was necessity. Some nights her joints hurt too much to climb any staircase. Other nights she needed to be on the ground floor, closer to the staff, in case she fell or called out and no one heard. The construction crews noticed the change too. Instructions came less frequently. Days passed with no new plans, no changes, no orders to tear down and rebuild. The workers continued maintaining what already existed, repairing roof tiles, repainting walls, fixing broken windows, but the expansion had essentially stopped. By 1920, the house looked the same as it had in 1915, the same number of rooms, the same sprawling footprint across the property. The hammering that neighbors had heard for 35 years grew quieter, then occasional, then rare. Sarah was letting go. She spent more time in the conservatory, the room with the stained glass windows and the small fountain. Servants said she liked to sit there in the afternoon when the light came through the colored glass and painted shifting patterns on the floor. She did not talk much anymore. She just sat and watched the light move. The séance room bell still rang at 2 a.m, but not every night. Sometimes it was silent for a week. Then it would ring again. 13 chimes cutting through the darkness, and the staff would know Sarah was still seeking whatever she had been seeking all along. Answers, forgiveness, contact with the daughter and husband she had lost so many years ago, or maybe just silence, a moment of peace in a house built to hold chaos. Her niece, Frances Marriott, visited occasionally. Frances was one of the few family members Sarah stayed in contact with. The visits were brief and formal. Tea in the conservatory. Polite conversation. Sarah never showed Frances the whole house, never walked her through the maze, never explained the rooms or the reasons. She simply offered tea and small talk, then retreated when she grew tired. Frances later said Sarah seemed smaller each visit, not just physically, though age and illness had reduced her to a frail, bird-like figure, but smaller in presence, as if the house had grown so large it had absorbed her, and all that remained was an echo moving through its halls. In early September 1922, Sarah moved her bedroom one last time. She chose a small room on the ground floor, simple, plain walls, a single window facing the gardens, nothing strange, no hidden doors or trap passages, just a quiet space where an old woman could rest. She asked the staff to bring her bed, a chair, and a small table. Nothing else. After decades of filling the house with furniture, objects, and architectural oddities, Sarah's final room was almost empty. On the night of September 4th, she went to bed as usual. The servants checked on her before they retired. She was awake, sitting up, looking out the window at the moonlit orchard. She died in her sleep sometime before dawn. No bells rang. No earthquake shook the house. No supernatural sign marked the moment. Just an 83-year-old woman alone in a room she had built, passing quietly in the night. The servants found her in the morning. They notified Francis. The foreman told the workers. By afternoon, the news had spread through San Jose. Sarah Winchester was dead. And for the first time in 38 years, the Winchester house was completely, absolutely silent. No hammering, no sawing. No footsteps in the halls. The construction was finished, not because the house was complete. It would never be complete, but because the only person who understood what it was supposed to be or why it needed to exist at all was gone. Chapter 11. What the heirs found. Frances Marriott stood in the front hallway and stared. She had visited her aunt dozens of times over the years, but Sarah had always controlled those visits. Tea in the conservatory, a walk through the gardens, never a tour, never an explanation, and certainly never access to the whole house. Now Sarah was gone, and Frances, as executor of the estate, had to inventory everything. She brought a team: lawyers, accountants, appraisers, men with clipboards and tape measures whose job was to catalog the contents and determine the value of the property. They got lost immediately. The hallways twisted. Doors led to unexpected places. Staircases appeared where they should not exist. One appraiser opened what looked like a closet and found himself staring at a 40-foot drop into the basement. Another spent 20 minutes trying to find his way back to the entrance and ended up on the 3rd floor instead. Francis hired a local carpenter who had worked on the house to serve as a guide. Even he struggled. Rooms he had built 15 years earlier had been walled off or reconfigured. Hallways, he remembered, had been sealed. The house had changed so much, so often, that no one, not even the men who had constructed it, could navigate it reliably. The inventory took weeks, 160 rooms, some fully furnished, others completely empty. A few sealed with furniture still inside, untouched since the earthquake of 1906. 40 staircases, 10,000 windows. The team eventually stopped counting and estimated 2,000 doors, 47 fireplaces, 17 chimneys, many of them non-functional, stopping short of the roof or venting into enclosed spaces. The numbers were staggering, but the contents were even stranger. In one room, they found dozens of identical sets of fine china, still in boxes, never used. In another, hundreds of bottles of expensive wine, covered in dust. Sarah had apparently ordered items in bulk, then forgotten about them, or simply never bothered to unpack. Closets filled with bolts of fabric, wallpaper rolls stacked from floor to ceiling, enough construction materials to build another house entirely. Lumber, nails, glass panes, all stored in rooms throughout the mansion, as if Sarah had been preparing for decades more of building. But there was almost no personal correspondence, no diaries, no journals explaining her plans or her reasoning. A few letters from family members, carefully filed. Some financial records, but nothing that revealed Sarah's inner life, nothing that explained why. The séance room yielded no answers. The 13 hooks were empty. The cabinet held robes, as the servants had said, but nothing occult. No spell books, no strange artifacts, just cloth and empty space. Frances later told reporters she had hoped to find answers in the house. Some document that would make sense of the decades-long construction, the bizarre design, the choices that seemed incomprehensible. She found none. What she did find was evidence of something else. Receipts showing Sarah's charitable donations, anonymous contributions to hospitals, orphanages, and disaster relief funds. She had given away substantial sums over the years, quietly, without recognition. Pay records listing the names of workers who had been on the estate for 10, 20, even 30 years. Men who had raised families on Sarah's wages. One notation showed a pension paid to a worker who had become too old to continue. Sarah had kept paying him anyway. letters from servants asking for time off to care for sick relatives, and Sarah's responses always granting the requests, always with pay. Frances began to see a different picture. Not a mad woman, not a terrified recluse, but someone who had carried grief and guilt in a way that made sense to her, even if it made sense to no one else. Still, the house was a problem. It was massive, expensive to maintain, impossible to sell as a residence. Who would want to live in a labyrinth with staircases to nowhere and doors that opened onto walls? The furniture was auctioned off. 5 moving trucks worth of belongings sold to pay estate taxes and debts. It took days to empty the rooms. What remained was the house itself, empty now, silent, a shell of wood and glass and stone that no longer had a clear purpose. Frances did not know what to do with it, so she did what many Americans in the 1920s did with things they did not understand. She turned it into a tourist attraction. Chapter 12. The Haunted Attraction. The gates opened to the public in 1923. Less than a year after Sarah's death, the Winchester house became a business. 5 months of preparation. Clean the rooms. Clear the debris. Hire guides. Print brochures. And most importantly, decide what story to tell. Frances could have been honest. She could have presented the house as an architectural curiosity, a monument to grief, a wealthy widow's decades-long project that defied conventional design but showed remarkable craftsmanship and provided stable employment during unstable times. But honesty did not sell tickets. The marketing leaned into fear. The mystery house, the advertisements called it. Come see the mansion built by a woman haunted by the ghosts of those killed by Winchester rifles. Tour guides were instructed to emphasize the supernatural, the curse, the séances, the midnight bells. They told visitors that Sarah built to confuse evil spirits, that she never slept in the same room twice for fear they would find her, that construction workers heard voices in empty hallways and saw shadows slip through walls. Some of it was based on truth. The bells did ring. The construction never stopped. Sarah did move bedrooms frequently. But the interpretation was pure ghost story. Every odd architectural feature became evidence of paranormal belief rather than arthritis, changing plans, or simple eccentricity. The public loved it. Thousands came in the first year. Families drove from San Francisco. Tourists traveling through California added it to their itineraries. Local kids dared each other to take the tour, half hoping to see a ghost and half hoping they would not. The guides developed a script. They led groups through the maze, pointing out the staircase to nowhere, the door that opened to a drop, the windows facing windows. They lowered their voices in the séance room and mentioned, always in a whisper, that some visitors reported feeling cold spots or hearing unexplained sounds. Were the stories true? Did people actually experience paranormal activity? Some claimed they did. A woman said she felt a hand on her shoulder in an empty hallway. A man reported hearing footsteps following him through the conservatory. Children said they saw faces in the stained glass windows that vanished when they looked directly at them. Skeptics had simpler explanations. Old houses creak, drafts create cold spots. Stained glass distorts light in ways that can look like faces. Suggestion is powerful. Tell people a place is haunted, and their minds will go looking for proof. But truth did not matter as much as the experience. People wanted to believe. They wanted the Winchester house to be haunted, because if it was haunted, that meant Sarah's fear had been justified. It meant the curse was real. It meant the decades of building had a supernatural purpose. Not just a sad one. The house became one of California's most popular roadside attractions. It appeared in travel guides. Postcards sold at the gift shop showed the exterior shrouded in fog, captioned, "America's Most Haunted Mansion." Sarah's memory transformed. In life, she had been private, misunderstood, occasionally pitied. In death, she became a legend. The Mad Widow. The woman who tried to build her way out of a curse and failed. Except, had she failed? Sarah lived to 83, longer than her husband, longer than many of her contemporaries. She survived tuberculosis outbreaks, the earthquake of 1906, the Spanish flu pandemic. She died peacefully in her sleep, in a bed she had chosen, inside a house she had shaped down to the smallest detail. If the curse said she would die when construction stopped, she had already broken it. Construction did slow, for years before her death, and ended completely in her final weeks. And nothing supernatural happened. No vengeful spirits, no dramatic reckoning, just age and natural decline. But that version of the story did not sell tickets. So the guides kept telling the ghost story. They kept emphasizing fear and madness over grief and purpose. They kept framing Sarah as a victim of supernatural forces rather than a woman who found an unconventional way to cope with unbearable loss. Decades passed. The house changed ownership multiple times. Each new owner continued the haunted house narrative, adding embellishments, modernizing the tour, but preserving the core message. This place is cursed, and the woman who built it was running from ghosts. By the 1970s and 80s, the Winchester house had become a staple of paranormal culture. Ghost hunting shows featured it. Psychics claimed to feel overwhelming spiritual energy. Books about haunted America almost always included a chapter on Sarah Winchester and her endless mansion. The truth, quiet, complex, human, was buried under layers of manufactured mystery. But recently, something has started to shift. Historians began looking closer at Sarah's life, at her charitable work, her treatment of employees, the practical reasons behind supposedly supernatural design choices. A new story began to emerge, one that does not erase the strangeness, but reframes it. Not a haunted house, a monument to grief, and perhaps, in its own strange way, to hope. Chapter 13. What Sarah was really building. The inventory of Sarah's estate took 6 weeks. Frances Marriott and her team cataloged the contents room by room. Furniture, china, clothing, construction materials. The financial records, though, told a clearer story than the house itself. Sarah had employed an average of 22 workers continuously from 1886 until her death. The payroll records showed wages above the going rate. A carpenter making $2 a day elsewhere earned $3 at the Winchester estate. Skilled craftsmen earned even more. The account books also recorded charitable contributions, anonymous donations to San Jose hospitals, money sent to orphanages, relief funds for earthquake and fire victims. The amounts were substantial. Thousands of dollars per year, roughly equivalent to hundreds of thousands today. Medical expenses appeared frequently, not for Sarah alone, but for workers. A payment to a doctor for treating a carpenter's injured hand, another covering surgery for a laborer's child, notations indicating continued salary during illness or recovery. One entry stood out. A pension paid monthly to a maintenance worker who had become too elderly to perform his duties. The payments continued for 3 years until his death. Sarah kept him on salary despite receiving no work in return. These were not the records of a mad woman. They were the records of an employer who treated labor as something more than a disposable cost. The house itself showed similar patterns when you looked closely. The shallow staircases were not supernatural design. They accommodated severe arthritis. Medical records confirmed Sarah suffered from chronic joint pain that worsened over decades. Standard stairs would have been difficult, even impossible, for her to climb. The multiple bedrooms made sense for someone with chronic pain. Moving between rooms allowed her to find more comfortable sleeping positions, avoid drafts, or stay closer to ground floor facilities when climbing became too hard. Many of the doors to nowhere were simply obsolete doorways. Construction plans changed. Additions were built. Old openings became unnecessary, but were left in place rather than plastered over. In a house under near constant renovation, that was not madness. It was normal. The windows-facing windows brought light into interior hallways that otherwise would have been dark. The house sprawled so extensively that many corridors had no exterior walls. Interior windows solved that problem. Even the séance room had practical explanations. Multiple exits provided escape routes in case of fire. A real concern, in an era of gaslighting and dry wood construction, the 13 hooks might have held tools, keys, or other household items. The bell system allowed Sarah to communicate with servants without shouting or walking long distances. None of this means Sarah was not spiritual. Records show she attended spiritualist churches. Letters mention her belief in an afterlife. The séances likely happened. But spiritualism in the 1880s and 90s was not fringe. It was mainstream. Millions of Americans attended séances. Scientists studied mediums. Presidents consulted spiritualists. Sarah's beliefs were not proof of insanity. They showed she participated in one of her era's dominant religious trends. The construction itself served several purposes at once. It employed workers during years of economic instability. The 1890s saw multiple financial panics. Construction jobs disappeared. Families went hungry. But the Winchester project continued, providing steady work and steady wages when both were scarce. It gave Sarah a project. Something to plan, supervise, and control. Widows in her world often had few options and were expected to fade into quiet domesticity. Sarah instead ran a large-scale construction operation for nearly 4 decades, and it created something lasting. Whatever her motivations, grief, guilt, spirituality, or simple eccentricity, the result was a structure that has now existed for more than a century, a place that has employed thousands of people as a tourist attraction and drawn hundreds of thousands of visitors. The Winchester rifle money came from death. That fact never changed. But Sarah's use of that money created employment, charity, and architecture. She transformed inherited wealth into wages and craft. Whether that amounts to redemption is a question each observer has to answer for themselves. What is documented is simpler. A wealthy widow spent 38 years building a house that made sense to her, even when it made sense to no one else. She paid fairly, she gave generously, and she created something that outlasted her by more than 100 years. The house stands today not because of curses or ghosts, but because of decisions Sarah made about how to spend her time and money. Those decisions were unusual, sometimes inexplicable, but they were hers. And they turned grief and guilt into lumber, glass, and 160 rooms that still confuse and fascinate anyone who walks through them. Chapter 14. The House That Refuses to Die. The Winchester house should have been demolished decades ago. By all practical measures, it made no sense to keep it. Too large to maintain, too strange to sell, too expensive to heat, repair, or update for modern use. After Sarah's death, the logical choice would have been to tear it down, subdivide the land, and sell the lots. But something stopped that from happening. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of the structure. The fact that it existed at all felt like a miracle of stubbornness. One woman, working without a formal master plan, had created something that rivaled the mansions of industrial titans who hired famous architects and armies of workers. Or maybe it was the story. By the 1920s, the legend had taken hold. The curse, the ghosts, the endless building. That narrative had value. Not scholarly value, necessarily, but cultural value, entertainment value, so the house stayed. And over the decades, it changed. In the 1960s, ownership shifted. New management modernized the tours, added electric lighting, and stabilized the structure. The earthquake damage from 1906 was finally repaired. Rooms Sarah had sealed were opened again, giving tourists access to spaces that had been frozen in time for 60 years. The narrative shifted slightly. Less Mad Widow, more architectural mystery. Guides started mentioning Sarah's intelligence, her business acumen, her treatment of workers. The ghost stories remained, but they were balanced with facts. By the 1980s and 90s, paranormal investigators began to arrive with equipment: electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, audio recorders hunting for electronic voice phenomena. They spent nights in the house, documented cold spots and unexplained sounds, and declared it genuinely haunted. Others followed with counter-explanations. Structural engineers pointed out that old wood expands and contracts, creating pops and groans. Physicists described how air currents in a poorly insulated mansion create sharp temperature shifts. Psychologists talked about the power of suggestion and how expectation shapes what people feel and hear. The house became a Rorschach test. People saw what they wanted to see. Believers found evidence of spirits. Skeptics found evidence of physics. Historians found evidence of grief. Architects found evidence of pain being accommodated through design. All of them were probably right in their own way. In 2016, a film was released, Winchester, starring Helen Mirren as Sarah. It leaned heavily into horror. Jump scares, ghostly apparitions, Sarah as a tortured medium battling evil forces. The movie took broad liberties with history, inventing characters and events, turning Sarah's quiet, repetitive life into a supernatural thriller. Historians criticized it, but the film introduced Sarah's story to a new generation. Millions of people who had never heard of the Winchester house suddenly knew the name. Ticket sales at the mansion spiked. The house had become something Sarah never intended, a character in its own story. A place that existed as much in imagination as in physical space. Today, over a century after Sarah's death, the Winchester Mystery House remains one of California's most visited tourist attractions. Hundreds of thousands walk through it each year. They move along the hallways, climb the staircases to nowhere, stand in the séance room, and wonder. The tours come in flavors now. Standard tours focus on the architecture and the ghost stories. Specialty tours explore the basement, the attic, and areas normally closed to the public. Behind-the-scenes tours show the structural engineering, the restoration work, the constant effort required to keep a 140-year-old mansion standing. There are flashlight tours at night for those who want the full haunted experience, walking through dark corridors with only a narrow beam of light, hearing every creak and groan, feeling every draft. In that setting, it is easy to believe in ghosts. There are historical tours that focus on Sarah's life, the workers, and the world she'd lived in. These tours acknowledge the grief, the spiritualism, and the complicated relationship between wealth and guilt. The gift shop sells everything from serious books about Victorian architecture to ghost hunting gadgets. Winchester rifle replicas sit next to Sarah Winchester dolls. History and legend, fact and fiction, all mixed together in a space that has always resisted clean categorization. The house itself still manages to surprise people who think they know it. In 2016, a room was discovered that had been sealed since Sarah's time, completely forgotten, boarded up behind a wall, invisible to everyone for nearly a century. Inside, Victorian wallpaper, a sink, a fireplace, untouched, perfectly preserved. It was a reminder that even now, the house holds secrets. That Sarah built spaces even the people who work there every day have not fully mapped. More rooms might still be hidden. more passages sealed, more choices Sarah made that no one has stumbled across or understood. The Winchester house refuses to be fully known, refuses to be simple, refuses to die, just like the woman who built it. Chapter 15. The Legacy in Wood and Glass. The Winchester house appears in more than 50 books about haunted America. Paranormal investigators have filmed dozens of television episodes inside its walls. Podcasts dissect the cursed legend. YouTubers pick apart the floor plan and chase cold spots with infrared cameras. The mansion has become a cultural fixture, referenced, analyzed, and reinterpreted by every new generation. But the way people interpret it keeps changing. In the 1920s and 30s, Sarah was painted as a mad woman. Newspapers leaned hard on insanity and obsession, the widow driven to delusion by grief and guilt. That framing reflected the era's view of wealthy, unconventional women. They were either properly supervised by male relatives, or they were unstable. By the 1960s and 70s, the narrative softened a little. Sarah turned into a tragic figure instead of just a crazy one. The focus shifted to her losses: the dead child, the dead husband, the weight of the rifle fortune. She was still portrayed as mentally ill, but now with a layer of sympathy. The 1980s brought the paranormal boom. Suddenly, Sarah was a medium, a woman in direct contact with spirits. The house became less a symbol of mental illness and more a piece of physical evidence for the supernatural. Believers pointed to the architecture as proof that spiritual forces were literally built into the walls. In recent decades, the story has shifted again. Historians and feminist scholars started looking at Sarah's life in detail. They found a woman who managed complex finances, supervised large construction projects, and kept business operations running for nearly 4 decades. Payroll records, contracts, and correspondence show organization and consistency. Not the chaos you would expect from the cartoon Mad Widow. The newer interpretations still acknowledge her grief and her spiritualism, but they also recognize Sarah's agency. She made choices. Unusual choices, but deliberate ones. The house was not just random construction by a confused mind. It was a decades-long project executed with careful budgeting and sustained management. Even the famous curse story has come under scrutiny. No contemporary source quotes Sarah herself, saying she believed in a curse. The tale of the Boston medium shows up in newspapers from the 1920s after her death, when she could not confirm or deny anything. It might be true. It might be a story polished and amplified to make early tours more dramatic. What remains undisputed are the numbers and the basic facts. Sarah inherited roughly $20 million in 1881, about $500 million in today's money. She moved to California and built almost continuously for 38 years. She employed workers at above-market wages. She donated to charity. She lived to 83 and died peacefully in her sleep. The house exists, 160 rooms, around 40 staircases, architectural oddities that are still hard to explain with certainty. The séance room is real. The long-running construction is real. These pieces are documented in blueprints, bills, and photographs. What those pieces mean, whether Sarah was mad, spiritual, grieving, eccentric, or some mix of all four, is still open. Each visitor walks the same hallways and comes away with a different conclusion. Some see signs of mental illness. Others see an unconventional way of managing grief. Some are convinced the house proves the paranormal is real. Others walk out talking about thermal expansion, drafts, and human psychology. The mansion works like a mirror. People mostly find their own beliefs reflected back at them. That ambiguity has become the Winchester house's defining trait. It refuses a single explanation. It pushes back against neat labels. It remains after more than 140 years, genuinely mysterious in a world that loves simple answers. Sarah never wrote an autobiography. She never sat for long interviews explaining her decisions. She left no manifesto outlining her beliefs or her intentions. The house is the only statement she left behind. And architecture, unlike a written memoir, does not come with footnotes. It can be read in countless ways. Today, the mansion stands in central San Jose, where it was once surrounded by orchards. It now sits among suburbs and tech campuses. The isolation is gone. The silence is gone. But the house remains, sprawling, crooked, and stubbornly resistant to being turned into just one story. Hundreds of thousands of people move through it every year. They climb staircases that go nowhere. Stand in the séance room, peer through windows that look straight into other windows instead of out at the world. And they leave with their own version of who Sarah Winchester was, what she was building, and why she never stopped. Chapter 16, The Final Walk. Walk through the Winchester house today and the route is carefully managed. Tour groups follow marked paths. Velvet ropes block off fragile areas. Signs explain the architecture. The experience is controlled, safe, designed to move as many visitors as possible, while still keeping the structure standing. But imagine walking through it in 1920, when Sarah was still alive, when the building itself was still in motion. You would enter through whichever door Sarah had designated that month as the main entrance. The front door changed periodically. A servant would meet you and lead you inside, down hallways that turned unexpectedly, past open doorways where workers hammered and sawed. The smell would be completely different from today. Fresh sawdust, oil, wet plaster, varnish drying on new wood. The house was a construction site and a residence at the same time. Dust hung in the air. Voices and hammer blows echoed through the corridors, bouncing off unfinished walls. You would pass workers who barely looked up. They had seen visitors before. They knew not to answer questions. They just kept working, following plans that might be replaced by new ones the next morning. The servant would guide you to the conservatory or a sitting room. You would wait there among plants and heavy furniture. Sometimes Sarah would appear, a small woman in black, polite but distant, her voice soft, her manner precise. Other times, she would not. The servant would return with an apology. Mrs. Winchester was indisposed. Please leave your card. If you did meet her, the conversation would be formal and brief. Sarah reportedly spoke quietly, chose her words carefully, and ended meetings as soon as she felt tired. That was often. She was not hosting salons. She was allowing interruptions. You would leave through a different door than the one you entered. You would walk past different rooms, down a new hallway, perhaps down a short staircase you were sure you had not seen before. The route out rarely matched the route in, whether this was intentional, Sarah confusing visitors the way she was said to confuse spirits, or simply a side effect of the labyrinth she had created. No one knew. That version of the house is gone. Sarah's presence is gone. The workers' noise is gone. The feeling that the building itself is still changing is gone. What remains is the shell, the architecture without the architect. The tour guides step into the gap and explain the features. The staircase that rises 7 steps into a ceiling, they say, was built because Sarah received instructions from spirits during a séance, or because the plans changed and the staircase became obsolete, or because she wanted to test a design before committing to a full flight. You are invited to pick the explanation that feels right. The door that opens onto a 15-foot drop exists for similarly layered reasons: a trap for ghosts, an unfinished balcony, a mistake left in place because fixing it cost money and time. The house itself never clarifies. This is what makes the Winchester house endure. Not just the ghost stories, though those help sell tickets, Not just the architectural oddities. Plenty of buildings have strange features. What lasts is the uncertainty. The sense that Sarah Winchester knew something visitors do not. That there was logic in the layout, intention in the additions, meaning in the maze. But she never wrote it down, never explained it, and now no one can. The house became a monument to questions without answers, to grief that could not be neatly spoken, to choices that made perfect sense to one person and still puzzle everyone else. Tourists walk through and try to solve it, decode it, find the pattern that explains 38 years of constant building. They will not. Sarah did not build the house to be solved. She built because building was what she needed to do to keep going. The why remains hers. The house, strange, sprawling, stubbornly unexplained, is what she left to the rest of us. A mystery in wood and glass that has already outlasted the woman who created it by more than a century. And will likely outlast everyone hearing this, still confusing visitors, still generating new theories, still refusing to be simple, just like Sarah Winchester herself. Chapter 17. Outro. The House at Night. The lights go off at the Winchester house around midnight. The last tour groups filter out. Staff lock the doors, set the alarms, and drive away. The mansion sits alone in the dark, outlined by the orange glow of San Jose streetlights and the distant hum of highway traffic. This is when the place feels closest to what it was in Sarah's time. Empty hallways, silence broken only by creaking wood and shifting foundations. No tour guides, no laughing groups, no audio guides. Just the sounds the house makes on its own as the temperature drops and the materials contract. Security cameras watch the rooms. Motion sensors guard the main corridors. The technology is modern, but the building is old. Sensors trip with no obvious cause. Cameras catch drifting shadows that might be nothing, or might just be dust, and drafts sliding through the frame. The staff has stories. A guard who heard footsteps on the second floor when every door was locked. A maintenance worker who found a window standing open that had been latched the night before. Little things. Each one easy to blame on old hardware, warped wood, or a tired memory. But the stories pile up. And they sound a lot like what workers were saying in the 1890s. Footsteps in empty halls, doors that will not stay shut. The feeling of someone just out of sight, moving from room to room ahead of you. Whether the Winchester house is truly haunted is a question this episode is not going to settle. The evidence is ambiguous. It always has been. It probably always will be. What matters more is why people want it to be haunted. If the house is haunted, then Sarah's fear was justified. The constant building had a target. The curse was real, and she spent 38 years fighting it the only way she knew how. If the house is not haunted, if it is just wood and glass and the physics of an aging structure, then she built for 38 years chasing something that never existed outside her own mind. And that is sadder, harder to sit with. The haunting, whether real or imagined, gives the story a clean shape. It turns a grief story into a ghost story. And ghost stories are easier to tell. But standing in the empty mansion at midnight, that difference starts to blur. Sarah Winchester walked these same hallways for decades, alone, at night, making decisions no one else understood, turning sketches and instructions into a building that outlived her and everyone who knew her. The house remains. Still strange, still inexplicable in places, still pulling in hundreds of thousands of people a year who want to walk where she walked, see what she built, and maybe catch a glimpse of what she was thinking. Some come for ghosts, some for architecture, some for history, some just because they heard about the weird house with the stairs to nowhere. but almost all of them leave with the same questions. What was Sarah Winchester really building? What did she believe? What kept her going for 38 years on a project that never ended and never seemed to make sense to anyone but her? The house does not answer. It just stands there, doors to nowhere, stairs into ceilings, windows staring into other windows. A maze of wood and glass that refuses to explain itself. Sarah Winchester has been dead for more than a century, but the house she left behind keeps asking questions, keeps confusing visitors, keeps proving that some stories are not meant to have a neat final chapter. This has been the dark story of America's most cursed mansion, the Winchester House. If you enjoyed this dive into one of history's strangest architectural experiments, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode with someone who loves eerie history. And tell me in the comments, which house or which legend should we explore next? Chapter 18. What Remains? The Winchester Mystery House is a California historical landmark. Designation number 868, assigned in 1974. The plaque at the entrance reads, "Built by Sarah L. Winchester, heiress to the Winchester rifle fortune, from 1884 to 1922. Folklore claims construction continued without interruption for 38 years to appease spirits, even the official marker hedges. Folklore claims. Not Sarah believed, or construction was intended to. Doubt is baked right into the historical record. The house is under constant restoration, rotten boards replaced, foundations reinforced, seismic retrofitting added to meet modern California earthquake codes, paint analyzed and matched to original colors. The work still never truly stops, only now it is preservation instead of expansion. Approximately 50 staff members work on the property full-time. Tour guides, maintenance crews, historians, gift shop employees, security. More than a century after Sarah's death, the house is still someone's paycheck. Annual revenue reportedly exceeds $10 million. Most comes from admission fees, with additional income from events, private tours, corporate gatherings, paranormal investigation nights. The curse story, whether born from fact or invention, still pays the bills. Local schools send students on field trips. Architecture programs study the structure. Psychology classes dissect theories about Sarah's state of mind. What the house teaches depends entirely on who is doing the teaching. Sarah's grave is in New Haven, Connecticut. She is buried beside her husband William and their daughter Annie. The three Winchesters together again, 3,000 miles from the mansion she spent her life reshaping. The gravestone is simple. No mention of the house, no reference to rifles, just names and dates. Sarah Lockwood Winchester, 1839 to 1922. In San Jose, the house supplies the rest of the story, the part that will not fit on a slab of stone. 38 years of construction, 160 rooms, a tangle of questions no one has fully answered. The Winchester Mystery House stands as Sarah's real monument, strange, sprawling, stubbornly resistant to any single, tidy explanation, exactly the way she seems to have left it.